She is seen as a foolish beauty in the eyes of men, yet she is a rebellious icon in the eyes of women. Pink is her battle armor, and wisdom is her weapon. When social prejudice tries to define her, she crushes arrogance with real talent and knowledge, tearing apart the label of mindless blonde. Who says sweetness and sharpness cannot coexist? Who says a blonde beauty cannot become a top lawyer? Today's movie is Legally Blonde. Elle, with her blonde hair and blue eyes, is always the center of attention wherever she goes. But for such a dazzling Elle, her life seems to revolve around only two things: making herself look perfect, and waiting for her boyfriend to propose. When Elle hears that her boyfriend Warner bought a 6-carat ring, she excitedly believes that her love story is finally reaching its happy ending, but in the next second,
I think we should break up.
Facing this sudden change, Elle finds it hard to believe.
If I'm gonna be a senator, well, I need to marry a Jackie, not a Marilyn.
So you're breaking up with me because I'm too blonde?
Elle turns away in anger, realizing that the perfect image she worked so hard to maintain has become the very reason she was rejected. At this moment, Elle feels full of hurt and frustration, and when she sees a male actor confessing his love on TV, the emotions she has been suppressing finally explode.
Liar! Honey.
She refuses to accept being defined like this, and she refuses even more to believe she is only worthy of being a pretty face. This pain of being dismissed instead ignites a spark of stubbornness deep inside her. What truly pushes her to make a change is seeing in a magazine that her ex-boyfriend's brother is getting engaged to a Harvard law student. In that moment, Elle realizes she must become better.
To be serious!
What? Practically deformed?
No! A law student.
However, reality is harsh, because the law school admission score is as high as 175. In the eyes of her teachers, this blonde girl who spends her days studying fashion magazines cannot even recognize basic legal terms, let alone handle the extremely difficult entrance exam. But Elle simply refuses to accept this fate.
Trust me, I can handle anything.
Just when everyone thinks she is only talking big, this seemingly delicate blonde girl actually begins an intense study routine. She replaces fashion magazines with legal textbooks, and swaps manicure time for practice tests. What is touching is that her sisters do not laugh at her dream, and even find ways to help her study together. Fortunately, hard work eventually pays off, and that day Elle receives her Harvard Law admission results.
179!
Elle not only gets in, but also achieves an astonishing near-perfect score. Her sisters throw her a grand party to celebrate the joy of her dream coming true. On the first day of school, when Elle appears in her signature pink suit, holding her equally pink little dog, the entire law school is shocked, and whispers spread everywhere.
Brad, check out Malibu Barbie. Where's the beach, honey?
But Elle does not care about these strange looks at all. Even so, in order to blend into the serious law school environment, Elle still tries to change her appearance. She puts on dull, old-fashioned suits and gives up her iconic pink, but such outfits do not suit her at all, and her dog even turns its head away in dislike. On her way to class, she unexpectedly runs into her ex-boyfriend Warner.
I'm sorry, are you here to see me?
No, silly. I go here.
You got into Harvard Law?
At this moment, Elle feels she has gained some ground, but reality quickly deals her another heavy blow. When all the students open their laptops and pull up notes skillfully, she is the only one holding a simple ballpoint pen. The female professor sharply questions Elle, but she cannot answer at all, so the professor turns to another female student.
Do you think it's acceptable that Ms. Woods is not prepared?
No.
Would you support my decision to ask her to leave class and to return only when she is prepared?
Absolutely.
Elle leaves the classroom with a heart full of frustration, clearly not yet used to such a serious environment. Unexpectedly, Elle runs into Warner again, and the girl who shined in class is also there.
Do you know her?
She's,
I'm his fiance.
Elle suddenly realizes that the hostility from that girl all comes from their shared past. Her eyes fall on Vivian's hand, and the 6-carat ring she once dreamed of is now on the other woman's finger. Elle feels a sudden sting in her heart, and her past hopes and present reality collide, leaving her unsettled. But Warner's current girlfriend Vivian seems to deliberately target Elle. In class she always answers before Elle does, constantly showing off her ring, and her glances toward Elle are full of provocation. This completely sparks Elle's competitive spirit.
Because I'm not afraid of a challenge.
Seeing the annoyed look on Vivian's face, Elle raises an elegant eyebrow, but this is only the beginning of her counterattack. In the days that follow, Elle launches her carefully planned strategy of revenge. She puts on her most eye-catching outfit, appearing elegantly in front of Warner, successfully capturing the attention of this heartless man. Even better, she always manages to run into the couple when they go out together, and each time she dresses beautifully, making Vivian so frustrated and embarrassed that she can barely control herself. Vivian pretends to be warm and friendly, inviting Elle to a costume party, her tone full of fake kindness. The innocent Elle thinks this is a sign of reconciliation and happily accepts. But when she arrives dressed as a glamorous bunny girl, she instantly becomes the joke of the entire party. Yet the confidence in her bones makes her straighten her back again as she walks directly toward Vivian in her high heels.
Thanks for inviting me, girls. This party is super fun.
Nice outfit.
Oh, I like your outfit too, except when I dress up as a fridge, I try not to look so constipated.
Vivian is left speechless with anger, but in the next moment Warner walks over, and his words still carry a sense of looking down on her.
Come on, you're never gonna get the grades to qualify for one of those spots. You're not smart enough, sweetie.
Wait, am I on glue, or did we not get into the same law school, Warner?
Feeling underestimated, Elle silently vows to prove herself with real ability, so they will never again dare to call her a pretty face. That night she rushes into an electronics store, buys the latest laptop without hesitation, and fills the gap in her study tools. From that day on, the library becomes her second home. As night falls she buries herself in legal studies, and even during workouts she listens to legal lectures through her headphones. And while doing hair with her friends she still clutches legal notes to study every second she can. This intense effort soon pays off, as she begins answering every tough question in class with clear logic and solid knowledge, completely shaking off her earlier embarrassment. What truly shifts her from proving a point to loving the law is helping her manicurist friend reclaim her dog. The unreasonable ex stands at the door causing trouble, scaring her usually bold friend to tears. Elle adjusts her glasses and steps forward.
I'm Elle Woods, Miss Bonafonte's attorney. And I'm here to discuss the legal situation at hand.
She fluently cites legal clauses about pet guardianship, speaking with more and more confidence, and even her friend gradually lifts her head again.
I'm taking the dog. Dumbass.
When they successfully bring the dog back, Elle feels for the first time that the law does not just counter heartless people, but can also protect what matters. In one class, just after Warner answers a question, Elle immediately raises her hand and presents a completely different viewpoint. Her reasoning is clear and convincing, and even the professor applauds her.
I believe you've just won your case.
After class, the professor asks Elle whether she has applied for the internship program, which is a position law students fight for every year. Elle immediately takes out the application form she prepared in advance.
Pink.
Oh, and it's scented. I think it gives it a little something extra, don't you think?
Elle is still the girl who loves pink, but now, the pink pattern resumes she hands and is no longer decoration for a pretty face. Not long after, the internship results are released, and although there are only 4 spots and competition is intense, Elle's name is on the list. Among those selected are also Warner and Vivian, and they never expected that the girl they once looked down on now stands on equal footing with them. However, the first case they take on together is already full of challenges. An 80-year-old billionaire is found dead in his home, and the biggest suspect is his wife, Mrs. Brooke. But as the primary suspect, she still refuses to provide an alibi, and no matter how the defense team questions her, she keeps silent, which puts the entire defense team in a difficult position. Just when everyone is at a loss, Elle keenly senses that this elegant lady may be hiding something she cannot speak about. Elle does not question the case the way the others do, but instead approaches Mrs. Brooke with skincare products and fashion magazines, using familiar women's topics to open a window. Elle's gentleness eventually makes Mrs. Brooke lower her guard.
Bodies with Brooke's butt buster workout. I was getting
It turns out that what the woman fears is ruining her own reputation, and she begs Elle not to make the truth public, saying she would rather carry the suspicion of murder than expose her secret. Elle solemnly agrees. Back at the firm, when everyone keeps asking her, Elle firmly keeps her promise and does not reveal a single word. But her ex-boyfriend tries to persuade her.
Probably hire you as a summer associate. Who cares about Brooke? Think about yourself.
I gave her my word, Warner.
So what?
Vivian stands quietly by the side without speaking, and later that night she comes to Elle on her own. She only comes to find Elle on her own in the middle of the night.
You know, Elle, I still can't believe you didn't tell Callahan the alibi.
It's not my alibi to tell.
And I thought that was very classy of you.
This is the first time the two of them put aside their bias, with no hostility and no provocation, sitting in the room talking like friends.
Did you know when he first applied? He got waitlisted.
What?
Vivian tells Elle that Warner did not get into Harvard on his own ability but because his family pulled strings. It turns out they have both been competing over someone who was not worth it, and this truth makes them look at each other and laugh, and all the tension caused by Warner disappears completely in that moment. In fact, friendship between girls can sometimes be this simple. Soon it is the day of the trial, and an unexpected situation occurs as soon as the session begins. The billionaire's daughter, in order to convict her stepmother Mrs. Brooke, actually pays the family's cleaner to give false testimony. In court, the cleaner confidently fabricates lies, claiming he had an improper relationship with Mrs. Brooke and even invents a motive based on emotional conflict, causing the case to take a sudden downturn and putting the defense team at a disadvantage. During the recess, Elle runs into the cleaner in the hallway, and she is so angry at his shameless behavior that she keeps stomping her feet, while the cleaner becomes irritated.
Don't stomp your little last season Prada shoes at me, honey.
This sentence makes Elle keenly realize that the cleaner might be someone who prefers men. She immediately returns to the legal team and shares this important discovery. Elle's persistence leads the team to try to verify it. So when the trial resumes, the senior student follows her idea and sets a clever linguistic trap during questioning. He first asks about the cleaner's relationship with Mrs. Brooke, and after his answer, he suddenly changes the topic and asks for the name of his boyfriend. The cleaner blurts it out without thinking, and the courtroom erupts. Only then does the cleaner realize what he has said, and he quickly tries to argue that a male friend can be called a boyfriend, but his words anger the young man sitting in the audience, who cannot tolerate him denying their relationship in public and stands up and walks out in anger. The cleaner's false testimony collapses instantly, and the case immediately takes a favorable turn. But before the joy of victory fades, the professor calls Elle into his office alone under the excuse of discussing case details. He uses praise as a cover to touch her inappropriately, and Elle suddenly slaps away that filthy hand. She originally thought she earned the internship through her hard work, but she never expected that he was only interested in her appearance. Elle leaves with disappointment in her eyes, feeling that everything she has insisted on has lost its meaning. The devastated Elle finds her friend and cries about her frustration and disappointment. Elle no longer wants to stay in this place full of prejudice, and she decides to leave the school. But her words happen to be heard by the teachers standing behind her.
If you're going to let one stupid prick ruin your life, you're not the girl I thought you were.
Running away cannot solve any problem. Those people want to confine her with stereotypes, but she intends to fight back in the brightest way. Elle decides to stay and tear apart the prejudices attached to her with her own hands. Meanwhile, when Mrs. Brooke learns what happened to Elle, she becomes furious and decides to support the girl who once protected her secret. The next day in court, Mrs. Brooke boldly speaks to the professor.
You're fired. I have new representation.
Who?
Under everyone's surprised gaze, Elle walks confidently into the courtroom wearing a pink suit. She displays her iconic pink to the fullest, and pink is no longer a label for a pretty face but her unique battle armor. She walks straight toward the professor, declaring war on the authority who once tried to belittle her and violate her boundaries.
You are fired.
Elle is not fighting alone, because her sincerity, effort, and determination have already inspired the people around her. They all sit in the audience, supporting her with their gaze, and the support among women becomes her strongest foundation. During the trial, Elle questions the victim's daughter. The girl firmly claims that she was in the bathroom taking a shower at the time of the incident, and when she came out she saw her stepmother standing beside her father's body. This seemingly perfect testimony makes Elle sense the smell of a lie. She presses step by step, asking whether she saw a gun in her stepmother's hand, and the girl evasively answers, "Although I didn't see it directly, she might have hidden it." This vague answer makes the jury begin to frown, clearly starting to doubt the credibility of the testimony. Elle then asks a crucial question, "Then did you hear the gunshot?" The girl becomes obviously flustered and mumbles, "I was showering and didn't notice." Her contradictory and flawed answers cause whispers to rise in the courtroom. At that moment, Elle suddenly changes the direction and asks the girl about her schedule that day. When she hears the girl say she went to get her hair done, the corners of Elle's mouth lift in a victorious smile, because this small detail about the perm completely exposes the girl's lie.
And wouldn't somebody who's had, say, 30 perms before in their life be well aware of this rule? And if in fact you weren't washing your hair, as I suspect you weren't because your curls are still intact, wouldn't you have heard the gunshot? And if in fact you had heard the gunshot, Brooke Wyndham wouldn't have had time to hide the gun before you got downstairs, which would mean that you would have had to have found Mrs. Wyndham with a gun in her hand to make your story plausible. Isn't that right?
The mask of the lie is finally ripped apart, and the girl breaks down and reveals the truth of the harm she caused. It turns out the gun that was supposed to be aimed at her stepmother accidentally took her father's life. The courtroom erupts instantly, and the jury members stand up in shock. As the gavel strikes heavily, the wrongfully accused Mrs. Brooke finally regains her freedom. With her sharp insight and rigorous logic, Elle becomes famous in one battle, and her name begins to shine in the legal world. The man who once abandoned her for not being good enough, Warner, now sees Elle's brilliance and shamelessly approaches her again.
But if I'm going to be a partner in a law firm by the time I'm 30, I need a boyfriend who's not such a complete bonehead.
Elle turns away gracefully and walks toward her own bright future without looking back. The legal world welcomes a new shining star, and she not only has a Barbie-like sweetness but also extraordinary intelligence and the courage to break prejudice. Many people see this movie as Elle's personal triumph, watching her rise from being dismissed as a pretty face to becoming a top lawyer. But hidden beneath the story is a warmer and more powerful theme: the understanding and support among women, which is the real reason Elle survives every obstacle and reaches the end. When Elle stays up late studying for Harvard, it is her sisters who keep her company through every night. When she experiences harassment from the professor and falls into self-doubt, it is Mrs. Brooke who steps forward and supports her against injustice. And even Vivian, who once saw her as a rival and challenged her at every turn, eventually lets go of her bias and extends a hand of reconciliation. This mutual support among women is more precious than any courtroom victory. Just like Elle's iconic pink suit, it is not only a challenge to prejudice but also a commitment to herself. In a world filled with hostility, the understanding and support among women are the strongest weapons.